our topic for today is proportions. So we're going to continue building upon what we've already learned so far in math. So in this unit, we've been talking about rate tables, unit rate, we just talked about ratios, and now we're going to talk about something called proportions. So proportions are pretty simple. Proportions simply mean that they are ratios that are equal. So equivalent ratios. So basically it's two fractions that are equivalent, but a ratio represents a certain quantity compared to another quantity. And if you see below, here are two examples of, sorry about that. These are two examples of proportions, equivalent ratios. So if you look at the first ratio, 5:2, or 5/2, an equivalent ratio to that would be 30/12. Just like we've done with equivalent fractions, if you can multiply by the same number top and bottom, that means it is an equal ratio, which means it is a proportion. They must be equivalent. So if you see over here in the rate table, you see the number 5, you see that 5 and 2 is the initial ratio, and if we continue on with the pattern, we can go down all the way to 30 and 12. So basically it's equivalent fractions, but in the form of two ratios. Okay? Sometimes we only have part of one of the ratios and we have to figure out the missing number. So let's take this first example. John did 16 sit-ups while Jen did 18. When John did 64 sit-ups, how many did Jen do? So basically we're trying to find that missing number. Now, instead of having to set up an entire rate table, what we can do instead is set up a proportion. So I'm going to start with the two numbers that I know apply to both John and Jen. So John did 16 sit-ups over how many that Jen did. Jen did 18. So my top number is representing John, my bottom is Jen. So I need to stay consistent with my proportion here. My top numbers need to be related to John, my bottom numbers need to be related to Jen. When John did 64 sit-ups, so my 64 would go here. How many did Jen do? So that's our question. We're trying to figure out the missing number here. So if you look over here at our missing table, we could find a pattern. 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48, 56, 64. You notice it goes up by 8s. And here we notice it goes up by 9s. So we could simply add 63 plus 9, which would get us to 72. However, you would have to write and draw an entire rate table just to figure this out. And we would have to fill in a lot more missing ratios. So instead of doing all of that, we're going to set up a proportion, which is over here. And I'm going to have two steps. Step number 1, I'm going to cross multiply. Now, I don't know 64 times 18 at the top of my head, so I'm going to go ahead and grab a calculator, and I want you to do the same. And I'm going to take 64 multiplied by 18, which equals 1,152. My second step is to go straight across and divide. So now I'm going to take 1,152 divided by 16, and my answer is 72. So how many did Jen do? Jen was able to do 72 sit-ups. So she was able to do more than John. So we set up a proportion, a ratio equivalent to another ratio, and we found our missing value. Another way to do this is to ask yourself, 16 times what number gets us to 64? Or 64 divided by 16, which is 4. Then we can multiply 18 times 4, which also gets us to 72. So there are lots of ways to solve proportions and missing values. So I just showed you one that I like to do, cross multiply then divide, but it is up to you which one you would prefer doing. Another way to solve this is actually to create a factor puzzle with the numbers in the word problem. So 16 goes here to represent John. 18 goes here to represent Jen. 64 goes here to represent John, and we're trying to find that missing value. So you could set up a factor puzzle, or you can cross multiply and divide, which is what I did to find our answer, which is 72. So let's do 4 examples with finding the missing proportions in these 4 problems. So what I'd like you to do is to do this either on a whiteboard with an expo marker or a scrap piece of paper and a pencil and solve these together. We're going to do the first 2 together. You're going to do them on your calculator, and then we'll solve for x, which x represents our missing number. So I'm going to do cross multiply and divide to find my missing value. So I'm going to take 8 times 9, which I don't need my calculator for that. I know that that equals 72. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is to take my value of 72 and divide it by my remaining numerator. So step number 2 to divide is to take 72 divided by 6. You can either do this in your head or on your calculator. I'm going to do it on my calculator, and my missing value is 12. So x equals 12, and that's my final answer. Simple as that. Cross multiply and divide. Let's try the next one together. 27 over 6 is my ratio, equals a mystery number over 4. So I'm going to take step number 1, which is to take my 2 numbers diagonal that I can multiply together. I can't do 6 times x because we don't know x yet. So I want to cross multiply by my 2 numbers that are already there. So step number 1 is 27 times 4. I don't know that multiplication problem in my head, so I'm going to take my calculator and take 27 times 4, which equals 108. That's my first step. And then my second step is to take 108, and if you notice, x is my numerator, so I'm going to divide by my remaining number, which is 6. So step number 2 is to take 108 divided by my remaining number, which is 6. 108 divided by 6 is 18. So x equals 18. So what I'd like you to do is to try the last 2 questions to solve for x for the missing proportions. The next 2 problems, so pause the video, take a few minutes to solve those, and then replay the video to double check your answers. If you had them correct, you're on the right track. If you had them incorrect, make sure you watch me very carefully as to what I do step by step, so that you can get a little bit of a better understanding of proportions and missing values. So if you're continuing to watch, that means you've already completed these 2 questions. So let's solve for x. Step number 1 is to cross multiply. So I'm going to take my 2 numbers, 25 times 4, because I can't multiply 10 times x, because we don't know x yet. So we're going to multiply 25 times 4. And I know that 25 times 2 is 50, so I'm just going to double that, which is 100. My second step is to divide by my remaining number. My remaining number is 10, so I'm going to take 100 divided by 10, which equals 10. But I'm not done yet. I want to make sure I write x equals 10. Make sure you did that on yours as well. X equals 10. Alrighty, and the last question. Cross multiply to begin. We're going to do 9 times 8, because we can't multiply 12 times 6. So 9 times 8, or 12 times x, sorry. 9 times 8 equals 72. That's my first step. My second step is to divide the remaining number, which is 12. So I'm going to take 72 divided by 12, which equals 6. I'm not finished yet. I need to make sure I write x equals, and x equals 6. And that's how you solve proportions with missing values. So we're going to continue practicing with this in class. If you have questions about it, please ask me. If this makes sense to you, awesome. We're going to keep building upon this and practicing more and more before we move on to our next topic.